Well, hi guys. Welcome back to school. Hope you had a good weekend. Of course, you know that I am working on the yearbook, so I will see you guys on Wednesday. You have Coach Dane today, and you have Strutzma on Tuesday. And as I was thinking this weekend, I decided that I didn't want to give you any more writing work to do right now. You guys have been doing so much writing and so much test prep that I thought it would be fun to go ahead and just move on into the 1800s. And the 1800s is absolutely my favorite time period to teach. Not that I don't love my John Adams, because I do, and that's my favorite time period in history, but the 1800s I love to teach because there's so many strange things that are happening in the 1800s. Now, you guys have already studied the 1800s in your American history classes. You know about child labor, you know about the suffragettes, you know about investigative journalism. I'm sure you guys talked about Upton Sinclair and the jungle and meatpacking and all of the trippy things that are going on. And 1800s America has this weird Gothic romantic vibe about it. And there's all these strange traditions that we see come about, especially in the Victorian time period, that make for really interesting reading and studying of history. And so to give you a little bit of a background about literature, we come into the 1800s in America and we are following close on the heels of the European Romantic movement. And everything that happens in Europe in literature, of course, transpires and travels to America, and we pick it up. It's no different than fashion trends, and I think we've talked about that before, about how East Coast and West Coast will often pick up trends and then it'll move to the middle of the United States. And the same thing happens with, Europe and America. So we have this romantic idea, which actually starts with like the Transcendentalists in Germany, and there's all this European history that we could get into, but we're not going to go there. So the Romantics are different from the type of literature that we've seen in the past. The focus becomes on the individual. The focus comes on being a rogue, not like the British gentlemen that stand up and say, we must stand here, and do this. It's more like somebody that says, no, we're not going to stand here and do this. We're going to do this, and everything's going to work out, fabulous. And so we start seeing this romantic hero that is definitely an individual that marches to the beat of his own drum. Usually they're a little bit dark and broody. And think about Batman, all of these superheroes, Logan, the ones that have these dark secrets, but they're still these good men. Okay, and all that dark hero stuff comes from the 1800s, the individualized rogue of the Romantic era. And so the Romantics, and Edgar Allan Poe was a Romantic, he was a dark Romantic. They focus on human nature. They focus on logic and sanity. They focus on rules and breaking rules. And it's a very interesting time period to read. Lots of good reading during this time period. And a lot of the things that you're probably interested in started in this time period. If you know Dracula, if you know Frankenstein, those are all Gothic horror stories that come out of this Romantic era. And so this subgroup, this Gothic reading group, it originates once again in Europe, and it's based on Gothic architecture. So think of those big brooding, houses and castles where it looks like they've got to be haunted or something sinister has happened in there. That starts Gothic literature. And in the 1800s, people wrote stories. Famous people, Dickens, Poe, Henry James. They wrote serial stories. So, and I don't mean cereal like eating cereal, I mean like continuous. And so they would have these magazines or these newspapers, and you would get just a little bit of the story each week, and then you would wait for the rest of the story to come. And they actually had Gothic magazines called Penny Dreadfuls. And so if you have seen the show Penny Dreadful, which it's definitely R-rated. So I'm not sure if, all of you have seen it. But it's based on that idea of the Penny Dreadfuls, where you would follow like a vampire story, or you would read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or you would read Henry James' The Turning of the Screw, which was a ghost story. And people loved these, and if people couldn't afford them, then they passed the paper around, and they would read it again and again and again until the next installation came out. It's no different than today how people follow soap operas on TV, and they're waiting for the next event, and they're waiting for the next event, or dramas on TV, Grey's Anatomy, Scandal, but these were done in newspapers or in Penny Dreadfuls. So really interesting stories, and the 1800s tends to be quite creepy. There's a lot of death rituals, rules that they followed related to people dying, clothing that they wore, photographs that they took of the lost loved ones, because today, we can take photographs easily, but back then sometimes that one picture was the only picture they had of somebody, so they often took it after they died. Lots of fear in the stories, and related to the history of the time period. And Luke, I think you and I were talking about that before a while back, about being buried and having the bell tied to your wrist so that there was a bell above your grave, and if you were buried alive, you could move your wrist and ring your bell. Of course, people in the 1800s didn't know as much about science as we do, and of course, by the time you were buried alive under dirt, the odds of you being able to wake up and ring a bell were pretty astronomical. But they were terrified of insanity, and that's because, look at the mental institutions of the time period. It wasn't a great place to be. It wasn't regulated. People could be put in for very strange reasons. As I told you before, many women my age who were going through perimenopause and menopause were put in mental institutions, including my great-great-grandmother. She was finally let out, but she was in for quite a while. And these types of things could happen. Children were put in mental institutions and not cared for always correctly. And so people of this time period were afraid of insanity. They were afraid of tuberculosis. It was widespread and rampant during this time period. Lots of people were dying of tuberculosis. That was terrifying to them. They were afraid of being buried alive because science, wasn't able to check the way we are today that somebody was really gone. So this was terrifying to them. And what the Gothic writers did was they wrote about all of these things in their stories. And so they would create these really gloomy atmospheres, scary houses off in the distance, all set by itself, where it would be hard to get somebody to, come and find you or come and help you. Brooding characters that you weren't sure if they were good or if they were bad. Heroines that were strong, but you were worried that something might happen to them, or maybe you weren't sure if they were really sane based on what was going on in the story. Was there something really happening, or was this person crazy? So you see a lot of psychological terror during the Gothic time period, very moody pieces. And so I thought it would be fun today, even though we did just have our Academy Week, but you've been doing so much writing work and so much test prep, and you're getting ready for the AP. I thought it would be fun to start off with a ghost story. So Coach Dane or Mr. Struzma, depending on what day you have me, you are going to be watching The Others. And it is based on a Henry James story called The Turning of the Screw. Now, if you have seen the film before, please don't ruin it for anybody who hasn't seen it, because as you know, it is a psychological thriller and it's constantly building suspense. So I hope you have a wonderful day with whichever sub that you have. I hope you enjoyed your SSR time and this little bit of a lecture on the 1800s, which I'm so excited to teach you. And now, enjoy The Others. I'll see you Wednesday.